Good morning, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day to you. Thank you for being here with us. We're really happy to see you. We have two amazing keynote speakers you're going to hear from today. But first, I have the pleasure of introducing to you someone who will serve as the moderator and the interviewer. He is the founder of Engineering Tomorrow, and I'm happy to turn this over to Mr. Bill Woodburn.
Thanks, Jillian, and good morning and good afternoon to everybody. I'm thrilled to be the moderator with two great people I could cross-examine, and that's Paris and Ignacio. And I think we have a series of discussions that we want to have. It's sort of a give and take. I'll throw out some questions, and we'll all jump in and respond. And also we have time at the end for answering a lot of the questions that the students submitted in advance. So first, I'd like to introduce Paris and Ignacio. They are married, have 3 children. How old is the oldest?
She just turned 6.
6. And then the next series of 2 are a boy and a girl?
6, 2 girls, 6 and 4, and then a little boy who's 2.5.
Okay. So I thought it would be interesting for everybody on the phone to get a sense of your background. So if you could start with college and go through, I think you have a picture of each other, and just talk a little bit about yourselves and they can get to know you.
Sure. I think I have a slide for that too. I'm happy to talk first. I'm Paris. So nice to meet you all. Thanks for having us. So I'm going to talk about my path over the past 25 years. I'll try to go pretty quickly. But I studied at Barnard College in New York City. While I was there, I studied English, so not a traditional STEM career or a way to start, but I read a lot of books. I wrote a lot of papers. I acted and I studied abroad in Paris. And I think kind of all of those things are tied to my curiosity about people and what motivates them, in addition to a strong need to communicate and to understand how to communicate. So I've always been really interested in a global perspective, which brought me to France. My name is Paris. My parents both had actually more leaning STEM careers. My mother has a PhD in biology. So I was always raised with a big appreciation for the natural world, lots of questions. My mother never really gave full answers, but always kind of encourage us to think about things from many different perspectives. And my father was an architect. So again, kind of that underlying current of engineering, but also with the nod to make things beautiful. And so really thinking about the aesthetic impact as well. So I kind of had those two forces behind me. And then that curiosity for people led me to study English, theater, and French, which again, non-traditional. Then I went into advertising. At the time, I was working on these big brands, Planters Peanuts. I did a Super Bowl commercial. I think what was most interesting about that time was really that it was a bunch of creative people all working towards an end goal. And again, trying to understand what motivates someone to buy something. So like, what's the thought process that goes into it? What do people need? And how can you surface that from a psychology perspective? And then I moved on to Frog. And so Frog is a very well-known design firm that focused initially on industrial design. So this is where I got to work with lots of heavy hitters in engineering. So I worked with mechanical engineers. I worked with software engineers. This was also when really digital, or what they were calling at the time when I first started, interactive, was really starting to become a huge part of our everyday life. So we got to think about both of those aspects, really how you would build a hardware product, working with mechanical engineers and going through the process of really the scientific method to kind of test those products and put them out into the world, prototype, put a whole bunch of ideas out, prove those wrong. And that really shaped a lot of how I think about my work now, but I was deeply influenced by working with those people. And I recognized that while I might have thought that engineering was very far from my interests, because I hadn't grown up being a person who was studying engineering or very focused on math, I really found that they were also seeking what motivated people and wanted to create products and services that were very much tailored to how somebody used something. So that was a real moment for me to kind of open up the world of engineering And I became very interested in technology because I've always loved making things real. And so from that initial concept part, bringing things all the way to implementation, obviously engineering is a huge part of that, and technology has been, for the past 15 years, a huge part of that as well. So got to work with some great brands there. After 5 years at Frog, I was living in San Francisco, and I decided to take a one-year master's program at the Harvard Kennedy School, which is the School of Government, but also people study public policy. We studied public administration. So while I was there, I took many different classes. It was a really great moment to reflect on the previous 10, 12 years of my career and think about what I wanted to do next. I spent some time singing in a choir there as well. It was a very expansive year for me. And while I was there, I met Ignacio. Never would have expected that. We were from very different places. Ignacio's from Spain. He was living in Oslo at the time. I grew up in New Jersey. Cheers to anybody from New Jersey. And just ended up in a class together. So that kind of started that path at the same time that I was really reflecting on my career and what I wanted to do. At that time, with those tech skills, I decided to pivot to public service. So I got to work with the White House for a couple of years. I was at the tail end of the Obama administration, working for an agency called the U.S. Digital Service. And that was an intent to bring private sector people into the public sector with tech backgrounds to really try to understand these bigger systems thinking problems, again, influenced by engineering and the approach, the framework that engineering uses. And I got to work with the Department of Justice, Department of Education, Veterans Affairs, really, really loved solving these big problems with the potential for impact. The scale is huge, working with government services. Then there's a small interlude where we got married while I was working at the White House. And then we had 3 children over 3.5 years. At that time, I finished my term and I had all my children while I was working at Booz Allen, which is where I am now. I run a user experience strategy team. So I have about 45 people working with me. And then our larger team is about 500. We work in the civil sector. And again, I get to solve really big problems for different agencies like the IRS, Department of Energy, HUD, the CDC. And there I'm really trying to modernize technology and ensure that people, the American public, can access the services and benefits that they deserve.
That's great. Thanks, Paris. And I think it gives everybody a good sense of a very full life at your young age. I'm a little bit jealous. But you said something that was really inspiring to me, and that is you got to meet a lot of big hitter engineers. And I think you must have been impressed because you married a big hitter engineer, Ignacio. So Ignacio, tell people your big hitter environment that you grew up in and from college on and the kinds of things you've been able to do.
Yeah, sure. And I should say that the picture at the bottom, I think, was our first date.
It was.
I think that picture at the bottom is our first date.
9 years ago.
But anyways, we can move to the next slide. One thing you'll see immediately from the slides is how the engineer is much more linear. So you can see this page being much more linear, perhaps than the one before, which I had a hand in, but not so much. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, typically square-headed engineering mindset, right? My path will be quicker maybe and simpler. My parents were not engineers, they were economists and they worked for the civil service. So I didn't really have any role models in engineering, but we can get into why I ended up doing that. My career is much simpler. I started in plasma physics, which you see that image there at the top. That's the inside of like a donut where you get to temperatures like the sun, even hotter than the sun, and you're trying to do nuclear fusion, which is the future. It's been the future for 50 years, never happened yet, but let's see. So I started there in nuclear engineering, and then I betrayed science. I betrayed everything I stand for, and I went to a company called the Boston Consulting Group. This is essentially management consultants, right? So these are people who, I mean, the old joke is they borrow your watch and they tell you what time it is. It's not really quite like that, but I really got my skill set upgraded at the Boston Consulting Group. They really teach you how to be professional, how to behave in meetings, how to analyze problems for business, as opposed to just engineering, which are very different mindsets. So that was the second step in my career, and it was very complementary to the engineering mindset that I had. And I think, that 3, 4, 5 was more or less the same thing. I think it was a reversion to engineering. At Global Infrastructure Partners, I actually met Bill, who was the person who hired me, and was my boss for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And there, I think it was an investment firm where you get to actually put money to work in big infrastructure projects. And I think what was good there is it sort of came full circle. I was able to have a hybrid professional experience, which combined the engineering aspects of infrastructure, as well as the more financial and business aspects of making things happen. And the last bit at the very bottom, that might resonate a bit more with the folks on the call today. I realized when Paris had her picture, it says 2000 to today. 2000, probably most of the people were not even born on this phone call, which makes me a little bit scared. But today, number 5, MGX is a new firm that started 6 months ago. And what's really unique, I joined 5 months ago, this firm. And what's really unique is that's the first investment firm in the world that is only focused on AI. So it's investing in chips for AI, in data centers for AI, which are the pictures you see there on the right-hand side. That's a data center in the inside and the outside. And it's investing in software and technology. If you guys use ChatGPT, we've invested in ChatGPT, we've invested in Claude. So it's only investing in AI. And then, at the bottom, I spent 11 years at university, which is a story for another day. But maybe my point with that was to say, you can spend a lot of time at university or just a little bit of time. It doesn't really matter. Life hopefully is long enough to do a bunch of different things. So, you shouldn't worry too much about whether you do a 2-year degree, a 3-year degree, or an 11-year degree in my case.
That's great. I'll just interject some personal feelings I have, and Paris and Ignacio sort of represent them in many ways. I think one of the keys to creativity and performance at work, or performance as a professor, or performance as a student, is several things. One is being intellectually curious, really questioning and probing and trying to understand why things work the way they do. The other is to be highly observant. So if you're curious and highly observant, you tend to be, I think, more successful and more creative. And then I'd say the third element is, if you have some strength, some element of capability, whether it be math or physics or biology or art or music, if you can couple those 3 things, an expertise, a curiosity, and keen observation skills, I think you have a path. And one of the things I love about engineering is, if you're curious and a really observant person, the skills you learn, the problem-solving skills you learn, is really wonderful, because you can approach business differently with a technical background. You can approach music, design, artwork, architecture, research and development, and creating new products with a different bent. And I think that Ignacio is a great example of an engineer that is extremely curious, spends a lot of time thinking out of the box, and has a passion for observing people, learning from people. And Ignacio, you said at one point when I met you, you're a continuous learner. And what he meant by that is he seeks out the opportunities to learn from others. And I think that's really cool. And I think Paris is a good fit, because I think she's similar, but more artistic. Maybe even more fun than Ignacio. So I think this is a great marriage, and I think it's just wonderful to see the 2 of them able to start a family and do all these professional things. Which leads me to my next question for both of them. How do you manage a busy professional life with having children, spending enough time with the children, and feeling like the parental role can be done as well as your professional role? So why don't we start with Paris, and then Ignacio can go next.
Yeah, I'm very happy to talk about that. Obviously, I love working, and I've worked my whole life, but I really love being a mom. We have 3 young children, and I want to be involved in so many aspects of their lives. They really count on us, and I feel that is a really, really huge part of my being. So I think one big thing that I have done to make that more manageable was the decision to live in Washington, D.C. And for me to kind of pivot my career a bit more to the public sector, where versus San Francisco or Boston or New York, where I had been working previously, where the hours were a little bit crazy. The hours in Washington, D.C. are more reasonable because we all work with the federal government. So for a long time, the federal government had pretty set hours, essentially 8 to 5 or 9 to 5. So I am, while though I am a consultant and, in the professional services, you have to be a bit more available. I am able to kind of time block. So I say, before 8:30 in the morning, I'm with my children. After from 5:30 to 8:30 at night, I'm with my children, and really very clearly define those boundaries. It also helps. I'm a bit more established in my career. I think, people trust me. I'm very accountable. I communicate well. So if I'm not going to be online or I'm not going to be in person, I'm very straightforward about that. And then if I need to, I can hop back online after the kids go to bed. But again, working with the public sector, I have more reasonable hours. So I wouldn't even say that every day I'm not getting back online at 8:30. I might need to clean the kitchen or to make lunch for the next day or read a book. But I think really being conscious about what skills you bring and how you can then bring them into an industry or an environment where that might be more reasonable. So professional services, not always known as that good, sometimes working on the client side at a GE or at a big company where you might have more reasonable, in theory that there are more reasonable hours. That's something just to explore when you're thinking about a home in terms of a career. And then I think the market that you're in as well. Some places like Washington, D.C. happen to be a little bit easier to have a family. I think the possibility to telework as well, to have a hybrid environment helps significantly. I mean, my mother was a research scientist, but then a teacher. And then she was at school every day, right? Like those hours they just are what they are. But she was allowed to have, she was able to have the summers to be with her family. So that was how she balanced it. I learned a lot from her approach. And while I don't take off big chunks of time in the summer, despite being married to a European who would love that, I do really carve out each day. I make sure that I'm spending a lot of time with them and that time is quality time. I'm not on my phone. I try to, read with them, do projects, all of the day-to-day. But I also think trying to ensure that you are working with people who might also, bring themselves a little bit more to work. My boss also has 3 children. He gets it, right? Today, I know that somebody on the phone when we first jumped on said her kids were home from school today. 2 of our children are home from school today. We have a great babysitter that helps us when our kids are not in school. We really trust her and count on her. But ultimately, I really feel like I'm bringing a lot home to the kids by being able to apply my passions and to work, to be able to contribute to our family in that way as well. And then I really try to maximize the shoulder time in the day, which is, of course, when the kids really want to be with us as well. And then the weekends, we take a lot of time. In terms of us, we do a lot of scheduling. We had a Trello board for a while with tasks. Send a lot of emails. We book time on each other's calendars, and just in terms of family maintenance kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But we try to, we trade stuff, right?
I'd say, obviously, so the first thing I'd say is it's very tough. So there's no 2 ways about it,
Yeah.
right? So to have 3 children who are little, to each of us, our jobs, it's very tough. But it's not doable. I mean, we're sort of muddling through, and it's working, and it's sometimes more fun than other times, but it's generally fun. What are the complexities? One of the main complexities is time management. You really need to manage your time very well, and you need to plan for logistics and things like that. So I'm connecting it back to engineering. As an engineer, when you study engineering, you really have to be ruthless about time management because there's so much, the workload is pretty tough. So you learn how to play hard and work hard. As an engineer in engineering school, and you can probably tell from my tone, I'm a very intense individual. So you learn in engineering school how to play hard and work hard. And that helps you later when it comes to your family and other parts of your life to manage your time, to plan. I mean, Paris and I are quite different in this, right? We get to a Saturday morning, and my first question on Saturday morning is, what's the plan for the weekend? And Paris already freaks out because she wants to go more with the flow. She's, as you said, Bill, she's much more creative, and I'm much more focused on the plan. So you need to bring the creativity, but also the time management and planning skills to make it work. And I'd say, like, at the end of the day, I'll finish with this point. Time, someone told me, a friend of mine told me, time is the most valuable resource that anybody has, and the most valuable thing that anybody will give you is their own time. So, you know, a very keen focus on how we go about it, as you said, Paris, like in the shoulder bits of the day, at the beginning and at the end. I travel a lot for work, so I miss some things with the children, but I focus on the interventions or the moments of the day that I can be here, and I really make those count and make my time oriented to those moments.
I think we try to balance it too, in that I am very present for the day to day. So like I would say, many of the nights I'm doing bed and bath time and dinner and all of those things so that the kids have a level of consistency. Ignacio will do these more intense, like one-on-one hangouts with the kids to really foster the relationship so that they feel like they're getting that extra attention. And so together, I think that we try to create an environment in which the kids feel loved and supported. And then I think both in terms of work as well, like we do work together. Okay, you're going to have a really hard week, so we try to make a plan together of how we're going to address that. I think for me, again, because we do think very differently, we really count on each other for different viewpoints on how we're approaching something. If one person is feeling stressed out about something, we can often work through that. That really helped that we met in professional school. I think we were both kind of, our first class that we met together, we were talking about failures. So got to kind of understand that about each other. So we do try to help each other out and work as a team.
And if you take a step back, it's a phase of life. I mean,
Right.
the children soon will be out of the door, and then you'll wish that we had, you know. So it's a phase of life, and then we'll have the time back. So maybe it's harder now, it's tougher now, but we both get to work, we both get to have fulfilling life the way we want. I mean, it's sometimes I wish I didn't work, to be honest. I'd rather stay at home and be a stay-at-home dad, particularly for this phase of life. But I know that in 10 years' time, when the kids are already going to high school, they're going to be doing their thing, and I probably want to work at that point. So you have to figure it out by phases as well.
These are great points. I remember when I went off to college, I went to the United States Merchant Marine Academy. And I went there because it was free, and it's a military program like West Point or the Naval Academy. But what I learned very quickly was time management, because there were regimental responsibilities, learning to be a naval officer. There was the engineering responsibilities of learning to be a good engineer and becoming a good student. And then there was athletic responsibilities, because I was on the track team at college. So I was really pushed in many directions, but I found I was much better when I started working after college relative to my peers, because I was efficient. I was really careful about how I used time. And I think maybe that experience in a military academy, which I highly recommend, and was extremely affordable. It was free, which was important because I grew up in a low-income family. It was really a lifelong skill, that time management piece that Ignacio mentions. And I think as you're in high school, there's more free time probably than you'll understand until you're out of it. But it's a good time to start to learn the discipline of having a plan, dedicating hours to study, dedicating hours for sports, and dedicating hours for social life. It's really important. So that leads to key life decisions. And I'd like Paris and Ignacio to share their thoughts on what they would tell themselves if they were back in high school. What should they be thinking about doing? How should they spend time to have best high school experience? So if you can, Ignacio, expand on that.
Well, that's a bit. I mean, I hadn't thought about it. That's kind of a bit off script. The what will you tell yourself? But we'll take it in stride. So, you know, the key life decisions, and I guess many of the folks on the call, right? You're 15 or so, 15-ish, thinking about what to study, whether to study or not, where to study. The one thing I'd say is that obviously there are going to be bigger decisions in your life, like who you marry is going to be more important than many, almost anything. But I wouldn't take lightly the stage that you're at now at 15 or 16, and being very thoughtful about where you're going to study, what you're going to study. which university, which country, even in some cases, I don't know, which city. So I think that is really important because when you look back 20, 25 years ago, it really influenced and shapes and opens door. In my case, it opened a set of doors. It really opened the field. So the first thing I'd say is that the decision that you need to make now is whether you're going to be glib about it or you're going to be thoughtful about it. And I would recommend that you take seriously the decision, that you don't get paralyzed by it, but you really think about it, talk to as many people as you can, because it's one of the points in life that you have to make a decision that is important. Where you're going to study, what you're going to study. I think a second area of decisions is who, is the people you spend time with. So let me just say briefly, right? Two areas: people and organizations and places. The people you surround yourself are going to shape who you are at the end of the day. So you're going to be a product of the 5, 6, 7 people you're hanging out with, your friends. So again, think about that. And the other aspect is the organizations you work at or the universities you're in are going to change who you are. I mean, let me tell a little story, right? When I spent 5 years in that place called Boston Consulting Group that I showed you at the beginning, that's an environment, management consulting, which Paris is a little bit in now, which is very focused on efficiency. So you really become a person whose main driver is being efficient. You articulate things in bullet points, 5 bullet points, bang, bang, bang. And time is very important. So I became, after 5 years there, a little bit short with my parents or with my friends. I became a little bit impatient when somebody was telling me their reasoning and they took 2 minutes. And I said, no, you should tell me that in 20 seconds. And it made me a little bit of a worse person with my family and friends, and a better person in some other ways. But the point I'm making is that the decision of where you work is going to influence your habits and who you become.
But so think back to yourself when you were 15 or 16, right? Like, did you actually approach school in this way at that time? Because I think the clearest decision that you made was you had the option to go to school in the UK or you had the option to stay in Spain, right?
Yeah.
And you could have studied engineering at either place, but why did you make the decision to study in Spain?
Great. So now I'm being interviewed by 2 people, as you can see, right? So it's like not only Bill is grilling, but my wife is grilling. This is natural. So obviously at 15, you don't have the visibility on all of these things, but I did have that opportunity, and I think it's a great question because it was either Spain or the UK, and both great universities, great programs. For me at that point, you will have to figure out what drives you in life. One of the things that drives me in life is uniqueness, and that's why my career is not I spent 20 years in one place. I actually spent 5 years one here, 5 years somewhere else, 5 years somewhere else. I wanted to have a unique experience. I'm a collector of experiences as well. So at that point, 25 years ago, my roots, which are in Spain, mattered a lot to me. And I really wanted my university friends, when I was 18, 19, 20, to be there, to have that base. So I thought, I will do that now. And eventually I did have the idea of going to do a graduate program. In my case, it was a PhD. So I knew I would probably do that. And I could do that in the United States or in the UK and England. So the decision was no. I mean, I really feel my roots strongly, and I wanted to study in Spain and have that core of Spanish friends. And I don't regret it for a minute. I mean, I think I don't regret anything in life, to be honest, but that's how I thought about it.
Mm-hmm. So I guess as a 16-year-old, you followed those instincts.
At a 16-year-old, I had a great family and a great upbringing. Just I'm going on a tangent here, but recently,
Oh, no.
Bill doesn't know this. Bill doesn't know this. In my new job, I went through 10 or 15 interviews, right? And in one of the interviews, a lady who's the chief of staff of the CEO, so an very important lady, was testing on my cultural fit. And she asked me, how was your childhood? I kid you not, I broke down in tears, in an interview for a job. I broke down in tears talking about my childhood, and that's just to say how much it matters to me.
Careful, he might start crying
I might start crying again. I'm getting teary-eyed again. So the decision was really driven by that childhood family roots that I wanted to stay in Spain for that period of
And that
time.
university was also where your mother's family was from,
Yeah,
right?
that university was
Right.
really
Like a different part of Spain than where he grew up, but he got to kind of get to know. Spain is very regional, so
Yeah.
it was a part of Spain, the Basque Country, where his grandparents were from, and so that was important.
But let me just finish with something, Paris, to tie it back to my point about being thoughtful. I decided that, but I had been thinking about 3 steps ahead. I had been thinking about, after doing engineering, it is likely that I'll be doing something related to research, which will give me the opportunity to maybe go and do the experience of studying abroad. So I had been very thoughtful about that. And that's why I'm encouraging you guys to be thoughtful about it. Even if you're 18, 16, 15, you don't know everything in life. Nobody does. But whatever you know, you can know more. You can ask people, you can have conversations, you can explore and read and form your own point of view. Just don't let it to chance or don't let it all to chance.
Paris, do you want to chime in?
Sure. So I guess, I loved my high school experience. I'm still very close with my friends from that time. I had very full days. I know Bill was talking about how there was more free time, but I feel like I was getting home at like 9:30 every night because I was doing play rehearsal, I was doing sports, I was very involved in the community, in addition to all my academics. And I was very focused on all of those. I think what I would tell myself actually happened to me a little bit earlier than high school is something that's called like a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And when I was a child, I loved everything academic. I loved math. I loved writing. I loved reading. I loved it all. And around 10, math got a little harder. And I started to get a little bit less confident in that area. So I started leaning in more to the subjects where I like barely had to do any work. I was just like doing so well. It was super easy for me. And I started leaning away from the joy and the pursuit that I really took in all subjects when I was younger. And so I think that followed me into high school. And I would say things like, "Oh, I'm not great at math," or like I'm not good at science, even though I mean I come from a family where my mother is a scientist, so that could have also been a little, pushback on my mom. But I wish that I had, less been focused on getting good grades and leaning into the things that I was really good at, and had continued to push myself in the areas and stretch. Because actually, when I went to grad school, and even in university, I stuck to the things I was good at almost exclusively. But when I went back to graduate school, I took like a year-long course of quantitative methods that was with a bunch of, like the Masters of Public Policy students were required to do this, but our programs, you weren't required. And I pushed through, I did it. I ended up doing well in the class, but I really was able to kind of get back to that, you know, joy in doing hard things and pushing through. It wasn't really that I didn't have the facility, it was just a little bit harder. So I would tell myself, if you're feeling insecure about something or you're struggling, that doesn't always mean that it's not the right path for you, and that there's a lot of benefit and satisfaction when you do push through, because I really found my way back to that many years later. So kind of wish I had discovered it sooner, but I also regret nothing.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think it's a good life when you can say at any junction in your life that you don't regret anything. That's a good life. Let's switch subjects to something that a little more abstract, and that is, how do you improve your odds to be lucky in life? So we all know in sports that sometimes a lucky play wins a game. We all know in academics that sometimes you answer a question that you didn't really know, but you lucked out by picking the right answer. But in life, you can actually think about those kinds of things that you can pursue that increases your likelihood of being lucky. So Ignacio, share with us how you were so lucky to meet Paris and then end up marrying her. How did you set that up? I need to understand that.
Today I feel lucky, Bill. Today I feel lucky. I don't always feel lucky, right? So I've got maybe 2 things to say about luck. The first is that I don't agree with people who are so proud of themselves because they've achieved certain things in professional life, and they attribute all of it to their hard work, their smarts, and how intelligent they are, and so forth. I think they're just completely underestimating the big factor in life that is luck. Where were you born? How your parents were with you, the friends that you had. You know, you can do some things about that, but you're just lucky. I mean, you cannot there's more things in life that you cannot control than you can control. So the thing you can control is how you respond to what luck throws in you and what life throws at you. So that's the first thing I'd say, is that to me, luck is probably more than 50% of life. The other thing I'd say is, I'll answer with a story as well. So I think mathematical story, right? But if you study a little bit of statistics already, or if you looked at, there's some situations where the odds are better than others. So the story is that I was living in Norway and I wasn't married. I was working hard, and I thought, what are the chances statistically that I find someone to marry with the life that I've got today, which was basically working a lot until 10 p.m. and then going out and partying in the dark, so meeting someone in a bar when it's dark and you're tired and you had a couple of beers. And also to compound that, I realized that I didn't really like Norwegian women very much. So that they were not really my cup of tea, in the sense that their values and my values were not really a good match. So I thought, okay, the population here is statistically against what I'm looking for. My lifestyle here is statistically leaving very few hours of the day to actually meet someone in a good environment. So then I decided to make a change, and I quit, even though they offered me to transfer with the same job to New York. But I thought that's not going to help, because I'm going to work even harder in New York. So it's going to be even more difficult to find someone. So I quit and I went back to university. And I thought, that's the environment where statistically I'm going to get lucky, because at university, people are there, to expand their horizons. You've got a lot of time to have a coffee with someone in the middle of the day. You're talking about interesting things. You're getting to know yourself better. You have time to meet each other. So statistically, I'm much more likely to be lucky and find someone to marry at university than I am to keep with my job, or even to move my job to a different city. So that's the story of, like, yes, luck is going to throw things that are out of your control, but you can do some things to put yourself in situations where you're statistically more likely to get lucky, right? I mean, to find what you're looking for. That's my little 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I mean, and it really, there's no other way we would have known each other. We met 6 months after I started in a 1-year program. And then, it's like January, the end of my semester was May. We would never have met otherwise. So good job that he did that. I think really just taking chances increases your
That's a good point.
Your opportunity to find luck. I think following interesting people in your career, even if it's an industry or a company you might not have heard of, but if somebody that you have interned for or studied under recommends it, it's definitely worth checking out. I know very well that once Iggy met Bill, he was like, I've got to work for this firm.
Yeah, and then Bill retired and I left the firm. So
but I really think, taking those opportunities to expand, think about all of the different people that you could connect with in your network, people that have gone to your high school, teachers that you've connected with that might be able to help you think more broadly. That can really increase your chances of luck.
I think that's a great point. I just want to double down on it, because following people, at least in my experience, is more important than following content or following locations or following organizations. And Bill's an example for me. I went into his company because of Bill, but before Bill, and actually now where I am, it's been the big factor has been who is there. I mean, who am I going to be working with? That's a way of getting lucky. I mean, if you're working with people who are a good role model, inspiring, and you're just going to be there, and it's going to rub on you. I mean, it's just the goodness is going to rub off you. So thank you. That's the English major here. It's going to rub off you. So I think that's another way of getting lucky. You go and follow people over and above content and places and whatnot. That I like that point.
I'll add one thing. There's a famous golfer from South Africa, and he coined the phrase, that the more I practice, the luckier I get.
Right.
Totally.
And I think when I think about sports, when I was younger and very active in sports, the more I worked out, the more I practiced, the more I shot baskets, or the more 400-meter races that I entered, or the more long jumps that I participated in, I felt not only did I get better, but I kind of had more luck. And I'm trying to remember the name of the South African golfer, Gary Player is his name. He coined that phrase. And think about luck in golf. I mean, sometimes you hit a ball, it ricochets off a rock and you're in deep trouble. And sometimes it hits a rock and it lands close to the pin. Life is a bit like that. So I think working hard is an attribute that improves your odds and makes you position yourself to have more lucky things happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about how having a STEM background makes you a better performer at work, makes you more successful over the long term and the short term. How do you feel about that? And Ignacio, you have the most STEM intensive background of probably anybody I know, with a PhD and undergrad degrees in engineering. Talk a little bit about the advantage you have with that background and how it's helped you.
Yeah. And I think Paris can also jump in because she works with engineers all the time. And in a particular type of engineer, which is interesting nowadays, software engineers, that probably some of the folks on the call are interested in software engineering. I'm more the mechanical, industrial type of engineer. And my answer to your question, Bill, is a little bit linear, right? So I think engineering, in a way, three simple, clear things that gives you is like, one is options. The STEM careers give you an enormous amount of options. It's more like opening doors than closing any. So it's probably the choice of career or the choice of degree that opens the more options. People who study engineering end up in business, in finance, in engineering, in art, in all sorts of things. So options would be the first thing. The second thing that STEM, I think, gives you, and engineering in particular, is my phrase is a furnished head. So your brain gets wired, and you learn how to think systematically. You learn what's good logic and bad logic, good thinking and bad thinking. So you can tell those things apart, which is incredibly valuable in anything you do the rest of your life, because you'll come across a lot of bad thinking and good thinking. And then the third thing that it gives you, I think, is just sheer horsepower, because you just have to work hard. To your point, Bill, right? You work hard, and that has a couple of consequences. You're more likely to get lucky because you're working hard, and you're also stretching yourself. You're stretching who you are in your. Then when you get into the workforce, you realize that you find things easier where other people find the same thing more difficult. And it's just because you're just used to working harder, to stretching your brain, and you got a very good logic or furnished head, that gives you in the end result, and this is how I wrap it up, is confidence. All of these things, like having a good head, being able to understand logic, having good work ethic, it just gives you confidence that when somebody throws a difficult problem at you, you're going to figure it out. You'll find a way. You become a resourceful individual. You might not know the answer, but you'll know how to find the answer, or you know someone who knows the answer, and you'll be able to bring in people on who will help you find the answer. It gives you a tremendous amount of confidence when you go through the scientific method, when you trained in an engineering background, and then you can end up doing art. I mean, I just recently started sculpting. I recently started doing artistic stone carving over the summer, and now I do it once a month or so. But it just gives you this. You dare yourself to do new things and to try and explore new things. Discoverer or the explorer or the inventor. I think that's a really good mindset that science, STEM, and engineering reinforce and give you.
That's great. Paris, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think also with engineering, you're always going to be kind of on the cutting edge. So that's really interesting. Not only that it gives you a framework or a way to think, a way to approach problems that is tested, but that engineering is always involved with what's next, right? It's always part of technology and things advancing. And I think as someone in the workforce, especially the rate at which things are changing now, it's just exciting to be close to that. And it's very motivating, I think, as a person in the workforce, in that environment, to kind of be on the cutting edge. So, and I do think he approaches problems really well. We approach them very differently. I have a list of like differences, which is longer than our list of similarities. But it's very interesting, and I think that's probably consistent with most people that I know that have had this engineering training, and that they really can tackle anything. So I wish I'd kind of discovered it sooner and been a bit more confident. But I was able to get close to it now in my career.
By association, she
I've been doing it myself for the past since 2010.
What about you, Bill? I mean, what
Yeah.
about your answer to that question?
Well, yeah, I think it's been a huge benefit. I was asked to run the industrial diamond business of GE. And one of the things I did when I first started was I worked 3 different shifts in the factory because I wanted to get a sense of how we were manufacturing the product. And the business was profitable, but sliding over time. And all the people, the hourly people, as well as the professional people, the engineers, the accountants, the sales and marketing guys, all thought we were the best in the world. And after working in that factory, I kept saying to myself, this is so inefficient. And it's like a big science lab flanged on to another science lab. It doesn't seem well organized. It seems too inefficient to be competitive. And I asked how we did as a manufacturer against De Beers, the big gem diamond business that also makes industrial diamonds. And everyone said, that's top secret. We're the best in the world. We invented it, blah, blah, blah. So in working in the factory, I looked at the amount of waste that we had relative to the amount of product that we finished. For every pound of industrial diamond that we made, we wasted 65 pounds of byproduct. That's grossly inefficient, and it really troubled me. So I said to him, where do we send all this waste? And they said, to a landfill. So I said, oh, I bet De Beers is far better than we are because we are really inefficient. So I had 2 engineers that happened to be 100 miles away from Shannon, Ireland, where De Beers had their biggest manufacturing facility. And Ignacio, you would know these names, John Higgins and John Casey.
Yeah.
Sent with rubber boots and a shovel. They each had the boots, and they each had a shovel, and they followed the De Beers, the trucks that were taking De Beers waste and putting it into a landfill. And what we found was all the materials for production, so we could estimate how much they produced in a particular cycle, what their cost position was, and what their scale economies were. And the difference was unbelievable. The press used to push carbon and heat it to extraordinary pressures and temperatures to make diamond in 45 minutes, where nature takes 2 million years, was so much more effective at De Beers. And the big thing was the size of the core. The core De Beers had was the size of a 5-gallon can of paint. Ours was more like a miniature can of Coke for a person, not for a family. It was phenomenal. So I took it with me in a strategic planning review with the CEO of GE. He was a legendary guy by the name of Jack Welch. And I showed him the difference because I thought, these people are never going to believe me. I need to bring physical evidence. It was the basis for turning around the entire company. We changed everything. Welch thought I was a genius, so that helped my career. Everything was different. And I think it was the combination of being curious and having a technical background.
Yeah.
Sorry for the long story, but that's an example of
great story, yeah.
Of the STEM background really helping me to think about, is this business really well run or not? Mm-hmm. And of course, then I was tasked with the job of turning it around. So that was the hard work. So I think with time getting short, why don't we jump to the last thing we have to talk about, which is what wisdom can you share with the high school students of today um, in advice and direction that they may think about as they enter into the decision of going to college, studying whatever field they want to study? What kind of wisdom do you have for them? Can we start, Paris, with you?
Sure. So I think something that's really important, in addition to the growth mindset, which is kind of something that I hope you all cling to and continue to develop, because it's like leaning into things that are hard, continuing to grow yourself as a person. I think within that, it's knowing your strengths, right? So if you happen to have an affinity for a particular type of STEM, or you have to have an affinity for writing or being with people, it's important to know that and continue trying to foster that as well as you move through school, because those are the special things that make you you and will make you unique in your workplace, right? So somebody who happens to be great with numbers, like, you will be the go-to person for that. You can continue to shape that in yourself. Even though you're working in the background to kind of get yourself to a certain level so that all of your skills across the board are enough, there will always be some peaks in you that have probably been there since you were a kid, right? Just things that you're naturally good at that you can continue to foster and will become the hallmarks of your career for what people go to you for and know you for. So I would say really thinking deeply about the combination of what gives you joy when you're working or when you're studying, what you're good at, and then how you can kind of bring those together to apply them in a work setting is really satisfying, but also, again, just like really what's going to set you apart, which I think is important. And then I think just spending time to discover those passions will also, whatever you're passionate about, will be really exciting for you. I mean, I think as you move forward in your career, you might not always be working on the thing that you're most passionate about, but there are ways to develop that outside of work. And it's important just in your whole life to feel as though you're working on things or with things that you care about, because that's brings you a lot of satisfaction as well.
Yeah.
Ignacio?
I'll jump in. So, and I'm looking at a set of questions that students sent as well. So if we don't get to answer them all, we can share our emails and we can, whatever helps, because, they took the time to send these questions, so we can do a fire drill on them. But to the specific question of advice, which I love dishing out because it's so easy to dish out advice. I used to have a little script of advice for these things, but I lost it, so I had to think about it again. The main advice that I would give is I'll just start with this. Actually, I wasn't going to study engineering when I was 18. I thought about studying philosophy. I loved philosophy. It was compulsory when I was a student, so you had to do 2 years of philosophy in high school, no matter what. No, even if you were doing STEM, you had to do 2 years of philosophy, and I loved it. I just thought I could teach that myself in the future, read. It was easier to do it informally as opposed to engineering and STEM, which you kind of need a bit more of a formal training. And I also loved physics and math, so it was clear which one to choose. So my advice is coming from philosophy. It's from a philosopher. He said, a life lived unexamined is not a life worth living. So examine your life, and as you now are going into university or not, I mean, who knows? Keep exploring who you are, examine your life, what moves you, what drives you, what scares you, what triggers you. If you don't really spend time throughout your entire life coming back to examining your life, I mean, you'll maybe put it in a positive frame. You'll have a much more fulfilling life if you examine it frequently, regularly, and you think about who you are and how you're changing. So that's my main piece of advice, is like examine your life and get into the habit of doing it. Some people do it through journaling, some people do it through conversations with friends. It doesn't really matter. Reading, whatever floats your boat. But examine your life. It comes from Socrates, by the way. And then I'm going to send you on the chat a 5-minute video, which is called Wear Sunscreen. And that's full of great advice. The first time I got that video, I watched it 14 times nonstop, and it's 5 minutes each time you watch it. So I'll put it on the chat, but that's got all the best advice that you could have in 5 minutes condensed.
That's great. I know we can't have much more time, but Ignacio, can you pick the best question that came from the students and answer at least one of their questions, because they did spend time. I apologize to all of you in the classrooms that we didn't have more time to go through this, but I didn't want to short circuit the chance to have a loving couple share experience in their marriage and raising kids and all of those things.
Yeah, I think Paris will help me, but we'll do this very quickly, fire drill. I mean, there are a couple of people asking for advice as you go into high school. So I think both Paris and I just address that from very different perspectives. Can you go straight into industry, do internships, work, help? Yes, you can go straight into industry. Yes, you can do internships. I think all of these things are great. I'd say Americans obsess about internships and obsess about work. Europeans obsess about life and having a good life and the joie de vivre.
The universal healthcare.
Is so sure, you know, but an internship's going to help. Don't obsess about doing an internship every single summer or every single month of the summer. I mean, make some time to just travel and do other things. So that would be.
I would say too, though, with internships now, it seems like many more people are paying for internships, which they weren't when we were coming up. Internships were unpaid, which was pretty limiting. Like I needed to pay my rent and stuff in the summers, so I couldn't really do an internship. But it would give you an opportunity to explore things in a more real life setting. So if you can find paid internships, because they should pay you for your work, then I encourage it. I think it's a great way to get to be in the real work environment without, waiting until you're done with school. I think, obviously Ignacio has 100 years of school for his job and they all brought him here. He collects degrees. I work with a lot of people, working with the government. Many of us are required to have at least an associate's degree, but there are a lot of people doing great work that did go straight to industry. Obviously they're doing some kind of training, like technical training. I think if you can do it, going to a 4-year school, because we had that experience, was really wonderful and very expansive, but I do think you can be in the tech world. Certainly without a degree. I think engineering might be a bit harder because, as Ignacio was saying, you really want to learn that stuff in a classroom. But I think there's many different paths, and you guys have access to so much more information than we did. It was all network and library and encyclopedia. Now you can really figure out how people have approached it.
I also say, like, you can do any of these. I mean, you can do the jobs that we've done without going to university. You can teach yourself anything these days through the internet. I mean, it's all out there. But that's not the point of going to university. I mean, it's like first of all, you're going to make your life much easier, because at some point, unfortunately, this is how the world works. You need some credentials. I mean, at least you need to get the foot in the door. Once you get the foot in the door, the world's your oyster. But it's going to make it harder for you not to do something like going to university. Also, going into a STEM career is going to make it even easier for you. So there's some questions here about salaries and opportunities in 50 states. That takes care of itself if you're doing engineering or STEM. If you're doing poetry, maybe you have to think about the state or the salary range and things like that. If you're doing, don't worry about salary ranges or in which city can I live. If you're doing engineering or STEM, you're super flexible to do whatever you want. But I think the whole point about university is to get to know yourself, is actually to explore who you are, what motivates you, what drives you in life. It's called university for a reason. It comes from universality, from the universality of being in a school where your friends are studying poetry and you're studying engineering. With somebody, you're having coffee with a historian, and then in the evening you're having drinks with with a biologist, right? So that's the point of university. It's not so much the specific degree and the specific thing. It's more about the general rather than the specific.
And then I think future outlook, obviously Ignacio talked about the job market and that there's so many opportunities for people who have a STEM background. I think, the future outlook is there's many things to consider, right? For you guys coming up now. I think AI is here. It's rapidly changing things all the time. Ignacio's company is working in AI, so we've started to integrate it into all of our lives. And I think, there's a lot of power there. It's very exciting. I think personally, I'm very invested in ethical AI and like the responsible building blocks behind it, because I think having that human piece and thinking about the biases that these LLMs are trained with, how that impacts your careers is very important. But what Ignacio always says is that, AI is not necessarily going to replace your job, but someone will take your job who knows how to use AI. So don't be afraid of new technologies. I would say embrace them, but be critical, be skeptical as you're using them so that you really can get them to work for you and with you moving forward.
Yeah, I think you guys on the call know more about AI than we know because you're younger and you're using it all the time. But what Paris said is true. So the CEO of my company told us, the senior team, AI is not going to take your job, but somebody like you who knows how to use AI, that's the person who's going to take your job. So, you guys are on top of it. You're using it all the time. There's a question in the Q&A. Is it going to make you smarter or dumber? Is AI going to make you smarter or dumber? A bit of both, I suppose, is the answer, right? I mean, if you just rely on it to do everything for you and you have no critical thinking, no way, if you don't read books, you're going to be dumber. So read books, engage in an active conversation with people who disagree with you, think about those things. That's going to make you always smarter. AI could make you smarter, it could make you dumber. It's just like everything, right? Does a phone make you smarter or dumber? Well, if you're all the time on Instagram and on Facebook, I can guarantee you're getting dumber. But if you're not using a phone to call or to text someone in a moment of, I mean, or for all the positive things that a mobile phone has, then you're also dumb not to use it. So it's technology per se is not good or bad. It's just about how you use it and what it does to you.
Yeah, but ultimately, this is our Valentine's sign off. I think nothing makes you more present than children. So it's important to live in the present as well and enjoy where you guys are in your lives. High school is a really exciting time, and we wish you well.
Yeah, happy Valentine's Day. We're going to go back to these three little monsters that you see on the screen.
Well, I want to thank both of you for really great insights, and I give you the award of the most beautiful family. So with that, happy Valentine's Day, and thanks, students, for your attention for this full hour of discussion.
Thanks, Bill, for the conversation.
Thank
you so much. Thank you, Paris. Thank you, Ignacio. Thank you, Bill, for being here. That was extraordinary. I was taking notes, so thank you for all the gems. Teachers and students, thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you soon on the 19th for our next event for Optimizing Networks. Take care of yourselves. Happy Valentine's Day.
you.